my name is Rosa Burch, and today I will speak to you on the Kurdish women's movement. But first of all, I'd like to thank you and especially the organizers for giving me the opportunity to send a video message because I cannot be there in person, but maybe one day we will meet all together, hopefully. So this particular day, the 8th of March, is very important for many women across the world, for actually all the women and actually all the men across the world. They just don't know yet, most of them. But especially I believe that the 8th of March should be a day where all women jointly speak with one voice for freedom and equality, for peace and democracy. And speaking about the Kurdish women's movement is exactly that. It is about creating a new future, creating a new vision for living together comradely, and with how the founder of the Kurdish movement calls it, Abdullah Öcalan, with societal love. And I think this is where also we can start to understand the Kurdish women's movement, which is based on the very famous slogan, Jinjian Azadi. Maybe some of you have heard it already or have used it already. It is translated into Jin, woman, Jian, life, Azadi, freedom. Woman, life, freedom. Jinjian Azadi has been not only the driving force behind the Kurdish movement, but it has been a motivation and a reminder to all the women in all the situations of their lives that the struggle is jointly, and the struggle is conducted not only in Rojava and northern Syria by the Kurdish women holding their weapons against the so-called Islamic State or invasionist Turkey, but it is also conducted in the everyday lives of women across the world, in Europe, in Athens, in Germany, in Latin America. Now, most recently, the attacks on Afrin have again demonstrated quite openly and deliberately how in situations of state of emergencies like wars, invasions and attacks, female bodies are the first target of the invasionist powers and mostly of the male state. Most recently in Afrin, Turkish-backed jihadist forces, they captured a body of a dead Kurdish female fighter, and they filmed how they mutilated this woman, and by mutilation I mean they were cutting off her breasts and filming it, stripping her body and filming the naked and blood-stained body and the practices of those jihadists in form of a victory message to the Kurdish liberation movement and to the world. And this practice was nothing it was brutal, it was very mostly brutal, and maybe the epitome of male aggression, but it also was nothing new for the Kurdish women and nothing new for the Kurdish experience with state power and with invasionist powers. Same practices were conducted last year in the southeast of Turkey, which is also called Bakure Kurdistan, northern Kurdistan. So in the southeastern part of Turkey, in the Kurdish cities, the Turkish military was capturing women in particular and doing the same practices like the one in Afrin. So they were capturing them, killing them, mutilating, stripping their bodies, taking photos, and leaving the dead bodies in the center of the city on a public square. So this kind of humiliation through the bodies of women, especially through the bodies of women fighters, is something maybe what we can call the epitome of the male state or male aggression or hegemonic masculinity. But it is for sure feminicide. So, but why are Kurdish women attacked? And this question, in order to understand that question, or in order to find an answer to that question, we need to go back a little bit, and we need to understand how the women's movement actually started off within the ranks of the Kurdish liberation movement. So first of all, it is important to understand that the co-founder of the PKK, the Kurdish liberation movement, or Kurdish freedom movement has been a woman. Her name is Sakine Cansız, and at this point I would like also to commemorate her, because Sakine Cansız, along with two other feminist activists, were the three women were assassinated in Paris by the Turkish secret intelligence service, and need commemoration, and we need to remind ourselves of these women, I believe, and I would also like to dedicate this message to the courageous women Sakine, Leyla, and Fidan. So Sakine Cansız was the co-founder of the PKK, and back then when the PKK was founded in the end of 70s, it was not founded as a gender liberation movement. It was so while within the first years of the PKK the focus was on national liberation, we could also see that how women within the ranks were assigned quite traditional roles, like for instance doing cooking practices, doing these kind of soft works and tasks. I interviewed for my PhD. I interviewed a few female fighters who were in the beginning, who joined the PKK quite in the early years of the PKK, and I remember how one female fighter, ex-female fighter actually, she said, "I was sent to work at our bakery and used to joke around and say, when we have a free Kurdistan one day, at least I can work as a baker." Or another woman said that the main challenger within the PKK was actually the patriarchy within the movement. So women within the movement, they struggled first of all against their own restrictions within their liberation movement, and they enforced their male comrades to understand their place within the movement and their place in a free society that was going to be established. So another female fighter, also ex-female fighter, she said men felt threatened in their hegemony and started to resist against the establishment of equal women structures. This showed us how much work we had in overcoming patriarchy, both men and women. So while the women were trying to establish some structures that were autonomously organized by women within the PKK, men were also resisting, because it was a hegemony crisis, using Gramscian words, a hegemony crisis for the male comrades within the movement. But after these kind of challenging moments and these kind of challenging situations, there was a paradigm shift within the Kurdish movement, not only in regards to female liberation, but also in regards to the objectives of the movement. An independent classical Kurdish nation state was not anymore something the movement wanted to do, wanted to achieve, and also the whole perspective was shifted, reversed. Abdullah Öcalan, the co-founder or the founder, the leader of the PKK, who along with other founding members started off the movement, although has remained as a ideological father of the PKK, has been very, very vocal about the situation, about the place of women in society. So he has said that the only reason, that there are two reasons why revolutionary movements in history were never very much successful in establishing a free society after the revolution. So he asked himself, and he actually made the movement ask itself, why was it that revolutionary movements were never, especially national liberation movements, were never so much successful in establishing free societies after the revolution was over or even successful? And he gives, Abdullah Öcalan gives two answers. First of all, he says freedom was always understood through the state. And the second answer was that the oldest colony are women. If you combine both hypotheses that Öcalan puts forward in order to, trigger this new paradigm shift within the PKK, you can see that the idea is that the state already creates unfree situations, especially if we look at the situation of women, that the state is a priori a male state, and that the male state only, according to its own male interest, will only emancipate women but never liberate them. And that the oldest colony of the bureaucracy, of capitalism, of patriarchy, whatever, like the oldest colony of history, are women themselves. So women are the oldest colony of human history. This is what Abdullah Öcalan says, reversing the idea of Maria Mies, an anarchist feminist scholar, who has claimed in her book The Last Colony Are Women. Öcalan says, no, actually it is not the last colony, but it is the first and the oldest colony of human history. Starting from that perspective, you can see that he equates a free society to the freedom of women. But how do you free women? And this has been like the main task and main question that has been asked by the Kurdish women's movement: how to free women adequately in order to establish a free society. And Abdullah Öcalan, like many other actually so-called third world feminist scholars, like Jaya Vardena, for instance, they say that only if women's struggles go ahead a liberation movement, especially in creating a national liberation movement, only then, when women are actively engaged with their own agency in building a national project, in partaking of the establishment of a national project, only then one can speak of women's liberation and not only of emancipation. And this has been like also the main driver in the Kurdish liberation movement, where women actively made their own space in struggling against the patriarchy within their own party, within their own movement, in making up space for autonomously for themselves, and to build women's structures within the PKK, who are autonomous and who are self-determined. And this kind of self-determination that not only goes back to national self-determination but gender self-determination has been the main pillar of the Kurdish liberation movement, and also has been maybe the main driving force today when we look at the resistance in northern Syria, Rojava, where women are at the forefront. Because the visibility of women in the Kurdish struggle today goes back especially to what I have just briefly described as the long history of women making their own space within their own movement in order to have a voice which is autonomous and which is liberated from male hegemony. I can also talk a bit about the manifestations of these of this attempt to make women more visible. For instance, we have in Rojava a village, Jinvar. It's called Jinvar, a village that is built by women for women. And the idea is to empower women, and to empower women in a way where they build their own life and their own lifestyle, but also like their own place in society. For instance, in European countries or in those so-called established democracies, when we have a situation where women are subjected to domestic violence by the male by their partners or by their fathers or family or whatever, those women are mostly sent to so-called women's houses, to those so-called protection houses, where they become invisible in society, where women are actually punished by becoming invisible, by becoming locked up in a building for women, where they cannot engage anymore in their daily lives, and they are being punished for the violence they have been subjected to the male violence. And actually, for most of those women in those so-called liberal democracies in Europe, for instance, the only way to actually participate in life, for instance, in going out of the women's house, is to be confronted with the threat of being violated again. And I think this example illustrates quite well how women are still not very much empowered in the same way as men in those so-called democracies here in Europe, for instance. But Jinvar, the women's village in Rojava, is aiming to reverse the situation, to create a space for women which is built by women, where women can say what their demands and needs are, that is protected. That it is a protected community where women can continue to participate in their lives, they can continue to participate in society, to go to work, to meet their friends, and so on. They can determine their rules, they can create their own space without being punished for their need to find refuge somewhere from a violent man in their lives. So Rojava has not only been a very good example to show how women have been fighting against ISIS, women are fighting against Turkey right now, against jihadists, against the darkness of that ideology where women are enslaved, put in sex slave markets, where women are raped, where women have nothing, where women are not worth nothing. Against this kind of darkness, Kurdish women have, rose as the epitome of freedom for the Middle Eastern societies. But beyond that, beyond the military efficiency, for instance, against ISIS, beyond the quite, the idea of self-defense in a quite visual way, where they point a gun to the enemy, they point a gun to patriarchy, there has also been a societal restructuring in the meantime, where women actively, very much actively, don't point a gun maybe to patriarchy, but actively attack patriarchy in building feminist and women structures, autonomous women structures, for a coexistence in the society they're building. So the national project, so-called national project, which is not ethnically based, but which is multicultural and diverse, this new project of society building has been pioneered by the women in Rojava. And as I said, it all goes back to the history of the women within the PKK. It goes back to the history of women who have also, within the PKK, struggled for their own voice against the patriarchy of their system. And it goes back to the ideological transformation and paradigm shift of the ideological father, Abdullah Öcalan, who has very clearly pointed out that a free society can only be free if their women are free, and who clearly has pointed out that the oldest colony are women, and that we have to liberate women first, but not as men liberating women, but as women liberating women in creating their own space. All those practices, all those historically very important developments are now somehow showing itself in the product, of the Rojavan Revolution. It manifests itself in the Rojavan Revolution, and it can only be carried out further with our support. And this is where I would like to also call upon you to show your solidarity more loudly and more determined, maybe, not only against invasionist powers like Turkey or ISIS, but let's frame it that way, for a more feminist society, for a more liberated society, where women have an active role. And I think we as women here in Europe, in Athens, I'm today in Cologne, or wherever in Africa, in Latin America, in all the world actually, can only learn from what the Kurdish women in Turkey, in Syria, Iran, and Iraq, but most particularly right now in Rojava, are doing, are showing us. We have to become more visible. Women can only be free if they autonomously create their own space and become more visible jointly, beyond all the differences of skin color, culture, language, and history, beyond all those differences, jointly together as women for women. Thank you very much for this opportunity again, and I would like to conclude my little message with the words Jinjian Azadi.